Hello everyone. This is your friend from Naruto Audio Fanfics, and we are back once again with a brand new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto Uzumaki revealed a hidden secret and left Konoha forever to be with Princess Yukie, Naruto x Yukie, Part 1. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing Naruto fanfics like this. So without wasting any more time, let's start today's fanfic. A 16-year-old Naruto sighed as he looked at the ship in front of him. He had a worried look on his face because only he knew what was really going on. Some people had parts of the puzzle but not like him. For his entire life he had lived a lie and now it was time to come clean. Atsuki was destroyed. The Sound Village and Orochimaru eliminated. Everything seemed like it was going great for the Leaf Village, but that was a lie. He looked around and noticed that everyone was here now. The Kazekage Gaara and his sibs. The Hyugas, Akamiki, Inazakas, Abarame, Yamanko's clan heads, the Hokage herself along with all of the Rookie 9 and Guy's team, but Sasuke along with the senseis, Ibiki, Anko, Genma, Ayame and her father, Tazuna and a few others assorted guests. A memory flashed in his head of the Princess of Snow Country and her family. He smiled at that and Sakura saw it, and for the first time this trip he was happy, and she asked, "What's got you happy now, Naruto?" Naruto looked at her and said, "I can't wait to see Yukie again. You remember her, right?" Sakura laughed and said, "It's a little hard to forget the Princess of Snow Country after what we went through all that trouble to save her." It was right before Sasuke left, with her smile fading a little. Naruto smiled and said, "Don't worry, you will see him again someday. Also, she's really became a strong leader after that time and her country has grown." Sakura looked at him and asked, "How do you know that?" Naruto looked at her and said, "I visited a couple of times while I was traveling with Erozanen." He asked her to be in his Ika Ika Paradise movie. Sakura looked at him like he was crazy and she asked, "She did not do it, did she?" Naruto laughed and said, "No." Her response was that only her husband would get to see her. Sakura let go the breath she was holding and said, "That's good that she is waiting." Naruto started up the ramp but yelled loud enough for her to hear and said, "No, you misunderstand me. She's already married." As he finished walking up the ramp followed by everyone else. When he made it to the top he was stopped by one of the members of the crew who leaned in and whispered in Naruto's ear. The crew man said, "Sorry to interrupt Naruto-sama, but the prince and princess have come to see you along with their security. They are in the king's suite near the captain's to your left, room 101. Naruto smiled and nodded and turned to the left and walked toward the front of the ship. Gaara was looking at Naruto and remembered the note he received last month from Naruto. "Gaara, I hate to ask this of our friendship, but I need you to come to Konoha on the 15th of next month and ask the Hokage to join the mission to meet the leader of Snow Country with all of the clan heads, as well as the Rookie 9 and Guy's team and Hanabi Hyuga also. Tsunade does not know about this at all, but it was an S-class mission that I could not talk about before this time and date that the third Hokage had me do for him. I promise that once we get on the boat and far enough out to sea on the way to Snow Country I will explain everything. This will not only affect Konoha but Suna as well, and if it does not go as planned we will find ourselves in the Fourth Great War. It's that serious and I am not allowed to mention or even tell Tsunade I know about this until then. Please, for our friendship and anything else I have with you, do this for me. I will be making similar requests to certain other parties that are involved, and the official notice from Snow Country will have exactly who has to come. Do not act as though I know what is happening until I say otherwise. Trust me, it's more important than Atsuki. Thanks. Naruto." Gaara looked at his sibs who he had already showed the letter to back in Suna and nodded, and they boarded the cruise-like ship also. Sakura saw Naruto nod and walk to the front of the ship and she started to head that way also when the same man said, "I am sorry miss, only special cases are allowed in that section of the ship while we are still docked." She looked at him and asked, "Then why is Naruto allowed?" Getting the attention of everyone who was on the ramp. The man smiled and said, "Naruto-sama was requested to go there by the leader of Snow Country's private guards. That got everyone's attention because no one ever called Naruto-sama." A certain white-eyed girl smirked at that, knowing a little about going on after what happened. Flashback. A 9-year-old Hinata was standing outside of Naruto's apartment to deliver the birthday present she had gotten for him. A pair of goggles. She was getting ready to put it on the ground at his door when she heard what sounded like a fight going on inside his apartment. Fearing the worst, she activated her bloodline and was shocked by what she was seeing. Naruto was fighting a wooden target that was moving, and what was even more surprising was what he had on. He had an ABNU uniform on except the mask which was on his belt as he fought. She was so shocked she failed to notice the person who walked up behind her. The third Hokage said, "Let's go inside, Hinata. By the expression on your face I think you accidentally uncovered something you should not have. We will talk about it and I have a proposition for you." Hinata was first scared until she saw the person behind her was the Hokage, and as she listened to him she calmed down and they entered Naruto's apartment and had a talk that would change her life forever. End flashback. A man who Team 7 members knew as Tazuna smiled as he knew what was going on because he had agreed with the third to help in return for what he did. Flashback. The third looked at Tazuna and said, "I agree to send protection and only charge you the C rank, which is the price you can pay even though I know it is an A- rank. I will be sending one of my best ninja with you on this mission to make sure things work out along with a side mission. He will contact you at a later time down the road after the mission has been completed and tell you what needs to be done to pay the mission. He will give you the code phrase, Kitsune Cage. Until that time act as though you were scared and your country was too poor to pay. He will make sure once the team finds out the true rank it continues and is completed." End flashback. He could not believe what it was that had to be done for this, but he had requested just like he was asked, along with the other thing that was more of his area of expertise. Acting as the leader of Wave Country was just a plus to it, but it was all worth it. He grabbed his bag and climbed the ramp. Hiyashi was not a happy man. First he was asked to come to the Hokage Tower with both his daughters and Neji, and then he was told they all had to prepare for a trip to meet with the leader of Snow Country for something that could lead to the destruction of the Leaf Village. He first was going to refuse until he was told the other 7 great clans had also been given the message along with a list of others that were requested by name. Never in all his years had he ever seen anything like this. It did not escape his notice that not only had the Kage made the request but also the leaders of Wave, the traveling merchant, the leader of Snow Country, whoever this person is, Waterfall Country had sent message only as had the Rainbow Country. Whatever was going on was being backed by some of the more wealthy villages in the world. He did not know what it was or how it was all connected, but was told that the third Hokage was involved somehow. Tsunade looked at her teammate who seemed to be down for some reason. She was shocked at first when she received all the requests from these different countries along with a scroll that was written by her sensei, the third Hokage, that told whoever was Hokage to do as requested by the parties that came to the current Hokage. At first she did not know what they all had in common, but thanks to her assistant Sakura she had learned they did have one thing in common. Even the group of ninja that had been requested. Ibiki, Anko, Shizune, Uruka, the Rookie 9 and Guy's team with their senseis, the Konohamaru Corp. All of the clans of Konoha and the only other main member of one of them. The cook from the only ramen stand in Konoha along with his daughter Ayame, and Dustin, the owner of the Wolfclaw weapon shop. Herself and Jiraiya. The only common thread was Naruto. Somehow he was involved, she knew it, and the way Jiraiya was acting he knew all or at least some of what was going on, but since he told her that the leader of Snow Country had sworn him to secrecy until the time was right he could not because the repercussions were grave. She hated being left out of the loop. When Sakura started to make a scene about Naruto it confirmed that he had something to do with this. After everyone got on board the whistle blew and the ship left the docks on the one-day trip by sea to Snow Country. Tsunade, after they were out at sea for about an hour, called for a meeting with everyone involved. 15 minutes later she looked at everyone and said, "Is this everyone?" Everyone looked around and Kakashi said, "It looks like Naruto not here." Tsunade sighed and rubbed her temples and said, "He better not be picking up your habits, Kakashi." Sakura, can you go and find him quickly? Sakura nodded and left the room and was heading toward the front of the ship when someone who looked like an ABNU landed in front of her and said, "Can I help you, Miss Sakura?" Sakura was startled and asked, "How do you know my name?" The man said, "All of the escort security was given info on the people who were coming on this trip." Sakura nodded, knowing similar situations like this before but not on such a large scale, and she said, I was looking for my teammate Naruto. Another figure landed beside the first and he was dressed like the first except he had his mask off, and it shocked Sakura by who it was, and he said, Sorry Sakura, the Dobi is busy visiting the prince and princess of Snow Country right now and they are not to be disturbed. Sakura stood like a fish out of water and finally asked, Sasuke-kun, is that you? Sasuke smiled and said, Yes, I was asked to help with security along with Itachi here. Pointing to the man who was beside him. Sakura pointed her finger at the taller of the two and said, Itachi, as in the Itachi you left us for to kill, the same Itachi that worked for Atsuki, the same Itachi that was after Naruto. Itachi took off his mask and said, Yes, but there is a lot more you are not aware of. By the end of this trip all questions will be answered. Come on brother. We need to check in with Haku and Zabuza. I will inform them and Naruto-sama about your needing to see him. Sasuke nodded and both left as swirls of leaves, and Sakura stood there for a few minutes as her brain tried to reboot before turning around and walking back to the group location. When Sakura entered the room everyone could tell something was wrong and Tsunade asked, What's wrong Sakura and where's Naruto? Sakura looked at her for a few moments and finally snapped out of it and sat down and said, I think I just lost my mind. Tsunade looked at her warily and Ino said, What's new forehead? Sakura still looked out of it said, I went to find Naruto when somebody who looked like an ABNU appeared and called me by my name. Sasuke then appeared beside him dressed almost the same and said Naruto was with the prince and princess of Snow Country, and then he acted all chummy with the guy next to him who removed his mask and he called Itachi and they seemed to get along, even though I checked the body of Itachi myself and saw he was dead. They then left and said they had to meet Haku and Zabuza who both died on our wave mission. A chuckle could be heard and everyone turned and saw it came from Tazuna and he said, No, they are alive and are members of the Elemental Village Security Force directly under the Shadaime Elemental Cages. Kakashi screamed, But I killed Haku with a Chidori and Zabuza died fighting those bandits while he killed Gato, how can they be alive? Gaara asked, And how is Itachi alive? I saw his body myself. The door opened and Haku walked in with Zabuza and she said, I was asked to make sure you are all doing okay. We still have a long journey ahead of us and we want everyone as comfortable as possible. Naruto-sama will be here shortly as soon as he can get away from the prince and princess. Kakashi looked at her with big eyes and asked, How are you alive? I killed you. Zabuza chuckled and said, Those were blood clones. The Rokime Hokage had to make us disappear so we could work without the hunters after us to prepare to help the Leaf Village with what is happening. Tsunade looked at them and said, There is no Rokime Hokage, I am the Godime Hokage and the only person I have considered as possible Rokime Hokage is Naruto, but he is not ready. Who is this person? Haku said, I am sorry but the Sandaime appointed this person with permission from the two heads of the council in secret and he has been waiting and preparing for what is to come. He was only allowed to give his existence only if you had refused to become Godime Hokage or at this time now if the missions failed. I can't say any more because he will have to tell you the rest himself. The Sandaime had to be careful with the situation at hand or it would have meant either the death of everyone in the Leaf Village or the enslavement of everyone. Hiash asked, But how is that possible? Naruto walked into the room and said, Tell me Hiash, could the Leaf at any time in the last 30 years stand up to the combined power of 16 villages at one time? As he walked to the front of the room and leaned against the wall shocking everyone by what he was wearing. He no longer had on his black and orange suit but a normal black ninja Junin outfit with a white cape with orange flames across the bottom and sleeves, but he also had the kanji for Rokime Hokage. Tsunade looked at Naruto and asked, What the hell's going on? The only thing that all of this has in common is you so start explaining and what is with the outfit you have. Naruto sighed and said, Zabuza, Haku, please join Itachi and Sasuke in patrolling the ship for unwanted guests and also keep an eye out. I don't trust that war horse more than I can throw him. He the village over to many times and by now the elders have informed him like I told them to. They both nodded and said together, Yes, Naruto-sama, as they left. Naruto waited until the silence was broken by Tsunade who said, Start talking Naruto, what is this Rokime stuff they were talking about and what is going on? Naruto motioned for the empty seat with the others and said, Have a seat. This will take a long time, and that question I asked you, Hiyoshi, was not a simple question. That is exactly what we are facing. As he walked to the front of the room and sat down on the ground in a lotus position. Tsunade said, I am not moving until know what is going on. Naruto leaned down and rolled up his right pant leg and put his hand in a ram sign and said, Kia. And a distortion was seen and a tattoo appear that only Tsunade knew meant. She looked at him and asked, how do you have the secret tattoo of the Hokage Naruto? Only someone approved by the heads of the council and the Hokage could have that. Naruto motioned for the chair Aegean and she sat down looking dumbstruck, and Hiyoshi looked at him and said, it is impossible for any country to stand up to the might of 16 countries at one time, and it is also impossible for them to join to do that because of their different views and opinions. Naruto said, I wish that was so, Hiyoshi, but because of certain events it is really possible. It all started before most of the people in this room were even born. Can anyone in this room tell me how exactly the Second Great Ninja War ended? And Jiraiya, you might want to stay close to Tsunade. When I reveal some stuff about the past, she might try and kill herself or perform Orochimaru forbidden jutsu to bring the Sandaime back to life so she can kill him. Jiraiya nodded and sat beside her, and she was looking at Naruto waiting. Shikamaru said, the Second Great War ended when all the great countries decided no victor could be had, as they were all going broke and the loss of manpower was too much to have. They had a peace agreement that was only known by the people who attended it as to what was decided. Why? Naruto shook his head and pulled out a scroll from his jacket before opening it and said, exactly right. The agreement was a sign of neutral hostilities. However, what is not mentioned in the history books is that the 11 minor countries had wanted to attack the 5 great nations after that because most of the fighting took place in their lands. The 5 great nations pleaded with them because it would have sent the economy of every nation into debt and into another endless war. A neutral party of the 5 great lords of the lands had decided to intervene and fix the problem before it got worse. Inoichi said, what does an event that happened nearly 70 years ago have to do with what is going on now, Naruto? I don't understand. Naruto looked at the scroll and said, I have the treaty that was signed. The neutral party had made an agreement with all the smaller nations to pay for the repairs to all the damage that was done. In exchange, the 5 great country would pay a tribute for 50 years to the neutral party to repay them for helping solve the problem. However, they covered themselves and they made each of the parites involved, the 5 great nations and the 11 smaller nations, that should any country fail to repay the debt in full, then the other countries had to help the neutral party claim ownership over the village that was in default and everything inside, including clans, bloodlines, buildings, money, ninja and techniques, and villagers as property. In other words, it would be 16 countries against one. Inoichi said, but surely we paid this so we would not have to be forced into slavery by this deal. Naruto said, we were fine until the last 10 years of the original contract, when a certain member of the Leaf Village decided he wanted his own private army during the Third Great War, and he intercepted the payments as spoils of war. He took the money and formed Root. The Sandaime never found out because of the war until it was too late after the war had ended, when the neutral party asked to the total amount due at that time because they did not want to force the deal. Since our economy was crippled by the war, we were unable to pay it, so the Sandaime came up with a plan that bought us some time that unfortunately was interfered with Aegean but by someone else, so he had to use another plan, and he did that by training me to get the money for the village and also a failsafe should outside interference happen. Aegean, looking bored while everyone was looking shocked. Sakura said, but you are an idiot, Naruto. How could he train you and do what you claim? It does not make any sense. Kakashi said, the Sandaime trained you. But how? I was your teacher, as was Jiraiya. How could he have trained you? Naruto took off his jacket and had a sleeveless black shirt on underneath and put his hands in a ram seal and said, Kia. And a distortion appeared on his left arm and a tattoo appeared that most of the adults recognized, and Naruto said, I was in ABNU for 4 years before I was 10, Kakashi. I had to show the village that I was an idiot to make them not look too closely at me because of their hate. I was trained to do missions solo, and I was also under Itachi before we had to kill part of the Uchiha clan, making several people gasp. Ino asked, why did you kill the Uchiha clan, Naruto? A voice from the back of the room said, because after they found out what was going on by Danzo, they started betraying the Leaf Village by giving vital information to Iwa and Cloud. It was the Uchiha clan council that had given Cloud info on how to kidnap Hinata as well as information on when prized ninja were out on missions to either be killed or kidnapped. The night that we killed them we had originally went to capture the Uchiha council but they resuscitated and my father sided with us. It wound up where it was those loyal to my father and the Hokage versus those that were loyal to the council. As it ended only 10 Uchiha were left alive and another lie was created to try and help the village, as everyone turned and saw Itachi Uchiha standing there. Gaara looked at him and his sand started to shoot for Itachi only to be stopped by a group of vines and roses appearing and stopping them making everyone look and see a pair of blonde-hair kids under the age of 4 and they had blue eyes and a little girl said, "Don't hurt Uncle Itachi, Daddy, Mr. Sandman not going to hurt him is he?" Naruto smiled and said, "No Yuna, Uncle Gaara not going to hurt the guy who was giving us secret info on Atsuki. He was just playing, happy to see his friend Aegean. Now what are you and Arashi doing here? Daddy thought you were asleep." Making everyone sweat drop at the thought of Gaara playing and calling Itachi his friend. If it was not for the fact the little children were in the room all hell would have broken loose. The little boy walked over and looked at the sand and was poking it and looked at Gaara and said, "Can you make sandcastle Uncle Gaara?" Making everyone sweat drop even more. Yuna smiled and walked up to Naruto and got in his lap and said, "We woke up when Uncle Itachi came and checked on us so we wanted to see you Daddy." Naruto smiled and Tsunade finally asked, "Naruto, who are these kids and how do they use my grandfather's wood abilities?" Naruto reached into his coat and pulled out a seed and made it grow into a red rose and said, "Yuna, I want you to go and give this to the pretty lady there. Her name is Tsunade and she is your great-grandmother I told you and your brother about." Yuna smiled and got up and walked over and she said, "Hello Granny." Tsunade smiled at the girl and took the rose and said, "What do you mean I am her grandmother and you still have not answered my questions?" Naruto sighed and said, "I know and the answer is one of the reasons I never call you by your name or title. That's one of the lies the Sandyame told to try and keep things under wraps. You may not want to remember it but you did have a child once. The Sandame told you that you had lost it because of the attack but that was a lie. You had a baby boy who was my father. He did it to not only protect both you and him from your enemies seeing as you had started collecting them at that point but also to ensure that our family line did not end by accident. I have known since the first day we met in that bar. I wanted to tell you but as a Hokage I was not allowed to because the needs of the village was more important at that point." Tsunade had a few tears in the corner of her eyes as she remembered those events and she hugged the little girl some more and said, "Who was he Naruto, who was your father?" Jiraiya said in a sad voice, "It was Arashi Kazama, the Yondaime. The Sandyame lived up to his name as the professor by outsmarting everyone as long as possible. I did not learn about it until the kids here used one of their bloodlines when Naruto had me make a trip here during our 3-year training trip. He had got away with tricking me the whole time we were here until we were leaving and Yuna here called Naruto daddy and made a flower like Naruto did a moment ago. Arashi came running up and said, "Hey daddy, look what Uncle Sasuke showed me." And he made a few hand seals that made Kakashi eyes go wide and lightning started to form at the tips of Arashi hand. Naruto smiled and said, "I am proud of you son but what have I told you about using jutsu when not in training areas or in fights and did you learn it right or copy it?" Arashi rubbed the back of his head and said, "I forgot dad and I copied it. It's boring to learn it the other way." Naruto shook his head and said, "Until you learn to use it right I don't want you to use it Aegean or I won't teach you the Rasengan when you get older and I don't care if you can just copy it. If you don't know how to use it right and what else it does it can be used against you." Sakura finally had enough and jumped to her feet and screamed, "Rasengan Naruto, he is just a child and does not have a fox in him to help heal him and I know what that other jutsu was also. Chidori, what the hell kind of father are you and when the hell did you become a father, and who is their mother?" Yuna laughed and said, "Uncle Sasuke is right. You are a pink hair banshee. That did it." Almost everyone started to laugh at Sakura over that one and she had a twitch. Naruto coughed a fake cough and said, "Arashi, Yuna. Daddy still has a lot of things he needs to talk over with his friends so go play with Uncle Itachi and ask Auntie Haku to show you how to fix." Both kids pumped their fist in the air and ran out screaming, "Yeah, more jutsu." When they were gone, Naruto turned back to the room and everyone had a look of explain on their face. Naruto cursed himself and said, "First off, Sakura. That jutsu was not the Chidori but something called Raiden. Nerve shock. It is a D rank jutsu. We have been teaching him and his sister both defensive jutsu to help protect them since they were 2 years old, seeing as they have enough chakra for a normal genin and are actually nearly genius level. Arashi could give Shikamaru a good run and Shoji and go. WEDID it while Atsuki was still out there as well as any enemies of mine or my family has out there. I had to keep secret about them even existing until now for fear that someone would either capture them or kill them to get to me. Now as for how they came to be, when Team 7 came here to help Yukie to reclaim her throne from her uncle, I had already been told what to expect on this mission, as I had a side mission to make sure her uncle never caused her problems Aegean to gain an ally and possible financial help. It was the one of the last missions the Sandaime had for me before he died. During that mission Yukie and I sort of bonded, and after the mission was over and I was in the hospital she confessed her feeling for me and I had also developed feeling for her. Kakashi said, "But you were completely covered in wounds after that and I left Sasuke with you to keep an eye on you while me and Sakura returned to notify the Hokage of the mission." Naruto nodded and said, "Why do you think he was my best man at my wedding that week, and as for my wounds I had the fox heal them quickly for me. Anyways, I told her about the real me and about the truth of Kyuubi's attack and my family, and she did not hold it against me and even supported of it. I also told her about what was really going on. When I left to return I did not know it, but she was pregnant with the twins you all saw earlier. When she found out she sent word to me and I gave her my bloodline summon contract so we could keep in contact, and luckily for me the infiltration plan for the Sound Village had worked and I was given access out of the village to go around and prepare for this stuff." Tsunade finally come out of her emotion mess enough to ask, "What sound infiltration?" Naruto said, "Sasuke defection was a setup so that we could recover the snake contract from Orochimaru and also have a spy in his village. For those who went on the mission, you will remember I nearly set several alarms off when we were fighting the Sound 5. It was a way to slow us down and not for Sasuke to successfully make it to Sound. I had my contact in ABNU who knew who I was, make sure an opening was available for him to leave. They also watched in the background when Sakura tried to stop Sasuke, but he had no choice. We both had our orders from the Sandaime we had to fulfill. They also were less than a mile behind each of our fights, ready to step in if things went for worse. I underestimated all of you on that mission as to how far you would go, or I would never have allowed it to progress as far as it did, and for those wounds I am sorry. Anyways, since he possessed a bloodline contract like I do now, he was able to relay messages like Itachi was doing to inform me and when he was alive the Sandaime what was happening." Shikamaru asked, "Naruto, what exactly is a blood contract you were talking about? I never heard of them before." Naruto smiled and said, "I am not surprised. Most people who have them don't know how to use them or even of their existence. Blood contracts are the original summoning contracts that were kept inside family lines, but after so many summon animals either got to many summoners or none at all, they started doing the contracts they use now. Bloodline contracts don't have to be signed, but you have to have the family markers in your blood for it to work. The Sandaime knew of 2 clans that had them and knew what animals they were, so they were like a hidden trump card for us. The Uchiha family has the cats. Hinata, would you be so kind?" Hinata smiled and said, "I would love to, Naruto-sama." And she did the hand signs after biting her thumb and slamming her hands on the ground, and a falcon appeared. Hiyashi asked, "Hinata, how did you learn about that?" Naruto said, "She learned it when she was 9 after she found out I was in ABNU. The Sandaime knew I would need some information when outside the village, so he told her what animal it was and the rest is basic summoning. If you know what animal your bloodline contract was with, you just think of it while summoning." Hinata was given the mission to spy for me and inform me of important matters. Don't be mad at her, Hiyashi, she was just following the orders of the Hokage. Tsunade asked, "So which one does our family have?" Naruto closed his eyes and said, "Originally we did not have one, but we do know because of Kyuubi. That reminds me, since I am coming clean, I have a few hunches about something. If you all would not mind, perform the hand seals for summoning and think of a fox in your head while doing it." Looking at everyone, Tsunade asked, "Why do you want us to do that, Naruto?" Naruto thought for a moment and said, According to Kyuubi, the Fox contract will only work up to 5 generations of me, meaning your grandfather and his brother, your parents, you and whoever was the father of Dad is along with 2 generations of him, Dad himself and whoever is my mother along with 3 generations of her, me and my children with the only exception being my wife since I got permission from the Fox. Odds are Mom and my grandfather are dead, but you never know, and I would like to know if I have any other family left. Jiraiya asked. So you want to know who your grandfather and mother are, huh? Naruto said. Yes. The one thing I learned about the third over the years under him is that he could lie through his teeth and you would never know, so I was thinking if he did something like he did with Granny here, I wonder what else he done. Everyone did it, and Tsunade, Shizune, and Jiraiya had a small fox appear in front of them raising a few eyebrows. Tsunade said. Okay, how the hell did that happen? Shizune could be because of her uncle Dan, who was the only man I slept with. Jiraiya rubbed the back of his head innocently, however that raised a lot of eyebrows as it was what Naruto did out of habit when he did not want to say something. Tsunade narrowed her eyes and Jiraiya said, I can explain, Tsunade. She said. I am listening. Jiraiya said. I was drinking with the Sandyame one night and I hanged into Dan to make fun of him, and you walked into the bar drunk and thought I was Dan, and we kind of went into the ally, and you can guess the rest. Tsunade was pissed but stopped any kind of attack when Shizune asked, then how am I related to Naruto? I had with only one person, but it was not Arashi. His name was Miso and he looked nothing like the Yodime. In fact he was a Chunin and I am an only child, and my uncle apparently did not have kids if Jiraiya is Arashi father. Kakashi said. Oh shit. Making everyone look at him. Shizune said. What? Kakashi made a hand sign and went up in a puff of smoke and changed into a man with brown hair and brown eyes and was the same height as Jiraiya, and Shizune pointed her finger at Kakashi as he changed back. Kakashi sighed and said. Well, you did have with Arashi sensei then. He used that disguise when he went out on dates because he did not want to be with someone because he was the Yondaime or his money. Shizune said. But even if that was real, I never had a child. I lost the ability to have children the year because of a rare virus I caught that year the Kyuubi attacked. Tsunade narrowed her eyes and said. Naruto, what did sensei say about your mom? Naruto thought for a moment and said. He said she died giving birth to me. Why? Tsunade thought for a moment and asked. What did you mean earlier when you asked did they copy that jutsu or learn it right? Naruto closed his eyes and opened them a moment later and opened them, getting shocked looks from everyone as a diamond was around his eyes. Shizune looked like she saw a ghost as Naruto said, the Sandyame said it was called Digen. He said I was the last who could use it. It lets me copy any hand signs jutsu like the Sharingan, but I can't see a few second in the future or chakra pattern or copy genjutsu or tiahutsu. I only use it against enemies who use a lot of jutsu I never seen before. If it's some I know, then I don't even bother with it. He then closed them and opened his regular eyes for everyone. Tsunade looked down and said, Inoichi, can I ask a favor of you? Inoichi said, sure Godime-sama. Tsunade said, can you go and look into Shizune's memories at the ones around the time of the Kyuubi attack and tell me what you find? Inoichi looked at her and said, only if it's okay with Shizune. Shizune looked at Tsunade and asked, what are you thinking, Tsunade-sama? Tsunade said, the fact that he has your uncle's bloodline tells me that he is related to you, and like you said, you are an only child. The fact you lost the ability to have children that year makes me suspicious. You were in Konoha at the time the Kyuubi attacked. I came and got you after the Kyuubi attack. Something's not adding up here. Shizune sighed and said, do it, Inoichi. Inoichi nodded and did some hand signs and entered her mind, and a few moments later came out and fell on his butt. He looked at Shizune and then Naruto and said, Shizune, may I ask a personal question? Shizune looked at him and said, go ahead. He looked at the floor and asked, do you remember how you got that scar on you, right? Tsunade said, she got it from the Kyuubi attack. Why? Inoichi shook his head and said, she got it from the grasscutter's sword. She is Naruto mom, but it appears that Naruto actual birthday is the 9th, not the 10th like everyone thought, and Shizune went into labor after she jumped in front of an attack Orochimaru was trying to hit the Yondaime with. The Yondaime has someone put memory blocks on her so she would forget all about Arashi, and they made her forget everything from the moment she confirmed she was pregnant until the Kyuubi's attack. It was most likely one of my clan, but I could not tell you who since we lost a lot of members in the attack. Shizune looked at Naruto and he smiled and mouthed later. She nodded. Naruto sighed and said, the plan was for the Leaf Village to befall a natural disaster so that the neutral party would give us more time to pay the fee out of guilt, which they did, but they gave us a new contract and put penalties on the extra time. We have been only able to pay the interest up till now officially, and so we still owe the balance, and our time runs out exactly 18 years from the disaster that hit the Leaf Village. We have less than 2 years left, so I think you all can figure out what disaster it was, though the original plan was for a wildfire to burn down the old section of the village that was to be condemned after the war since nobody lived there. The Sandyame made it look like fake people lived there in the records with his original plan, but after the Kyuubi attack the official count of the destruction was taken from the fake records, so not as many people died in Kyuubi's attack as everyone believed. We can thank Orochimaru for the attack, but since he's dead it's okay. Shino said. If Orochimaru had not had made Kyuubi upset, the plan would have worked and then we could have paid the debt off. Naruto nodded and said, the Sandyame and Kyuubi both told me the truth when I was 4 after I received a beating and first met the fox. The Sandyame took time and trained me, and the first thing he taught me was blood clones so it could take my beatings while he trained me, and then put me in ABNU doing A and S rank missions that were all going into an account to draw interest and were completely off the books and help pay for the debt. After the Uchiha mess I had the other 8 Uchiha hide as hunter nins, but since there was no official listing for them all missions I had them do wear strictly off the books and went into the account to try and save the village. However, even after 2,000 missions we had only made a nod to pay 10% of the debt. Hiash asked, exactly how big a debt are we looking at? Naruto said, $200 quadrillion, making everyone gasp. Hiash asked, why is it so much? Naruto said, when we renegotiated after Kyuubi Danzo assassinated the first negotiator for them and they took offense. They enforced a penalty. I was only $10,000 short of the original fine with all the missions we did in secret. However, with the penalty that was another story. I came up with a plan after reviewing the contract, and until my plans were finalized I could not reveal anything, but I have come up with a way to save the people and citizens of Konoha from slavery, as well as all our money and techniques, as well as bloodlines, and because of that no matter what I will no longer be a leaf ninja. Making everyone scream what? Dustin asked. Why is that, Naruto? Naruto smiled and said, after I got close to the original payment before I became a genin with the Rookie 9 I went to the lords and asked for a compromise after explaining the truth about Danzo's treat cherry. They told me they might have a deal if I could come up with something they want. When I told my wife about the problem after 2 years of marriage when me and Jiraiya visited, she gave me permission as her husband to use something the lords would want. Spring Country itself. This got everyone attention and Tsunade asked, where is Spring Country and how does that help us? Naruto smiled and Tazuna said, since Team 7 saved Snow Country they have officially changed their name to Spring Country and have become one of the wealthiest countries in the world because of the new influence of farmlands and other natural resources, since they used to be under a blanket of snow and ice but now have the best farmland in the farmland to grow food and other products. Kakashi asked, how does this exactly work, Naruto? Are you just giving them Spring Country to save the village? Naruto said, no. There is going to be a tournament held in Spring Country itself, and Tazuna has built an arena there for us with his engineering skills that have forest, mountains, valleys, trees, rivers. It's a 10-mile battlefield and each team gets up to 25 people to battle. That's where you all come in. I wanted to tell you the entire truth so that way you know what's at stake and ask you to join my team. Shikamaru asked, who exactly are the other teams? Naruto said, all parties involved get one team, and the way it looks is Iwa, Cloud, Rain, Mist, Danzo, and myself are making teams. The other countries say they do not want to be involved since 4 of the 5 major powers are involved. It is going to be a winner-takes-all battle, so you can guarantee deaths. I don't know what Danzo will do, but I know he knows, and if he wins I can guarantee with the backings of all parties involved he will make himself the leader of the village and make it like his route. Gaara asked, why was Suna not allowed to get involved, Naruto? Naruto said, the Wind Lord decided that his country has seen enough war and does not want to risk it, but the truth is I think he was scared to confront you about it, Gaara. He still remembers when you threatened to crush his nuts with you sand if he did not get out of your office after you told him you were not going to have Tamari sleep with his son so he could brag about it. That's why I asked you to come also, Gaara, because I need all the help I can get. I hate having to ask friends to fight, but everyone in this room has earned the respect of not only myself but the Sandyame when he was still alive. So far I only have 5 confirmed people on my team. Me, Sasuke, Haku, Zabuza and Itachi. If that's all I can get, so be it, but I am fighting to win because I will not let my wife throw her homeland away for the Leaf Village, and I don't care if I have to kill everyone who gets in my way. I should tell you all that whether any of you decide to get involved, those from the Leaf Village will go to whoever wins, and also the head of the clans will have to come watch the battles from the observation decks to know who will get rights over them even if they are not fighting. If my team wins, I am handing all right except for Spring Country itself back to Tsunade as the Godime Hokage, including my office, which is under a genjutsu in my apartment. If you remove the toilet lid in my bathroom, you will find a chakra focal point to dispel it at. I will be remaining in Spring Country with my wife and children. That's all I wanted to say, and thanks for the patience. As he got up and left in a swirl of flames, leaving a shocked room. Hiba asked, "Who was that?" Hinata said, "That was the real Naruto that he has had to hide because of our village for his entire life," as she got up and walked out the door. Anko said, "I am in. Gaki beat the shit out of Orochimaru so I can return the favor." Ibiki said, "In case any of you are wondering, he was telling the truth about being Rokudime Hokage. I was his contact in ABNU and had one of my men also reviewing all missions before they ever reached Tsunade so he could pick the ones that were too dangerous for normal Leaf Ninja to do, like assassinating of the Lightning Daimyo 2 years ago. If that mission had failed or the person who did it was caught, it could not lead back to the Leaf since it was done by an Uchiha, and everyone knows no Uchiha is currently loyal to the Leaf. I am following the Rokudime for his last mission." As he left the room with Anko, Shizune looked at Tsunade and said, "I have some grandkids and a son to get to know." As she got up and Jiraiya started to get up when Tsunade grabbed him and said, "We need to talk." And both left in a swirl of leaves. Everyone that was left looked at each other, and Hana asked, "So what are we going to do?" Shikamaru sighed and said, "Why do blondes have to rule the world and be so damn troublesome?" Getting a hit from Ino and Inoichi. Sakura was thinking for a moment and said, "I wonder what village Itachi and Sasuke are a part of now with the other Uchihas." Getting the attention of everyone in the room. Tazuna said, "Officially none. Naruto has a village made for ninja that are looking for a place to call home like them. If they will help defend Spring Country from any enemies it might get, so what happened to Wave won't happen to Their Country. All of the Uchihas live there and are happy. I know it is still small with only about 40 ninjas so far, but they are not getting involved in this fight." Naruto told them that this was the Leaf's problem and he was finishing his duty to the Leaf. Most of the ninja that live there are either genins that left Their village after Their first kills and could not handle it, or too old to do much more than play games and be with Their family. The others are ninja like Naruto who want a place to be with Their families, and that's how they got there. So far the village is calling itself the Village of All Elements, and it is going to be ran by 5 cages. Gaara asked, 5 cages, how will that work? Tazuna said, "Well, the way Naruto explained it to me is the cages are divided up into the 5 main elements. Water takes care of all the problems in the village with health and food. Fire takes care of defense of the village and training at academy. Lightning takes care of energy and trade-related items such as businesses and merchants. Wind takes care of all the out-of-village mission as well as training after graduation, and Stone takes care of all citizens' needs that are not related to ninja, as well as maintaining help for all the missions that are D and C rank on the island, as well as protection of the leader of the Royal Council." Hiyashi asked, "What is this Royal Council?" Tazuna said, "Princess Yukie decided the people of Spring Country needed a body of government so they won't fall under a dictator like her uncle was. The people were happy but sad because they wanted her family to have some power still, so they agreed to give the royal family 33% power on the council and 1 veto a month on an issue, and they stay as the figurehead for the country." Inoichi asked, "Then how did she give Naruto the right to use the Spring Country in our problem?" Tazuna laughed in a way that made everyone feel like they were idiots, and he said, "None of you have visited the countries that he has helped, have you? In your village he is seen as a demon or at the least a pest. In over 10 countries he is seen as a hero. My country named our bridge after him because he showed our people the pride in ourselves that we had lost. In T country he showed them that even when people are trying to take away from you everything you can still stand up and protect what is precious. To the people of Rice he is the ray of light that all evil should run from because he showed them that the only way to truly lose is to never try. In Snow country he had a chakra restraint put on him and he still defeated the former dictator and showed them that through courage and compassion even in a never-ending winter spring can return. When she asked to do this for Naruto, not only did the entire council approve it but also every citizen of Spring country. It unified them to show thanks to him for what he did for them. You are all idiots for never noticing it. Even when he acted like an idiot he still showed his strength. Neji battle against him as proof of that. And he walked out the room leaving an awestruck group. Neji after a moment of silence said, he's right. When I had my match Naruto was already a Kage, he beat me with just a bunshin, Kage bunshins and chakra that even though it came from his friend, it was no different from me using my bloodline. He could have beaten me at any moment but then my pride would not have learned. Shikamaru said, I wonder if I can get a game of shogi with his kid or the real him, it might be interesting. As he left the room with his dad beside him. Ino looked at her dad and said, what are you going to do, Dad? Inoichi said, I don't know. Shino said, I am following my Hokage. And his dad nodded and they both walked out the door. Hiyoshi said, perhaps we should turn in for the night as it is getting late. Choji just ate his chips as him and his dad walked out of the room. Kiba looked at his mom and asked, well, what are we going to do? His mom looked at him and said, a good dog never turns on his pack and I for one don't want that Danzo to get control of the village. Hannah said, you heard her runt. As she followed her mom out of the room with her brother a few feet behind her. Kurenai asked, so what are we going to do? Kakashi said, you know what I am going to do. Dustin asked, why am I here? It's not like I have any weapons to fix or make or anything. A voice from behind them said, actually you do. Making everyone turn and Kakashi's eyes got big at the sight of the person standing there. Kakashi said, Rin, is that you? Rin smiled and said, hey Kakashi, it's been a while. Dustin said, sorry to break up this meeting but what is it you were talking about? Rin walked over and pulled out a scroll and bit her thumb before breaking the seal and said, I need these repaired for 3 friends. Showing 2 swords. Kakashi saw them and stuttered, but that's my dad's sword, how did you get it? Rin said, Naruto-sama been collecting the pieces in secret for you and the other one was the Nadime's Hokage's sword. He plans to use it during the fights ahead. The last one is for Sakura there. It was her dad's sword that was broken during the Kyuubi's attack. I live on the island now with my friends. Sakura was shocked because she knew of the swords but never thought that she would ever get to see them. Dustin looked at the pieces and whistled and said, this is going to be fun. With a smile on his face. Tenten slapped her forehead and said, you had to do that didn't you? Lee asked, what's wrong? Tenten said, Dad's favorite hobby is restoring historical weapons. He's a kid in a candy store. Ayame said, then what are we here for, Dad? That would be to see your uncle Ayame. Making her and her dad turn to look at the man who walked in the door and hugged her. Her father smiled and said, how have you been doing, Ruban? I have not seen you in 15 years. Ruban said, good. I ran into Naruto 2 years ago and he tried to kill me for stealing your recipes but after I told him who I was he calmed down and asked if I would like a job and I have been working in the village in spring ever since. I was hoping you and Ayame might come and join me and my wife. Have the family together, Aegean. Ayame smiled and said, we will see, let's go talk more private. As she grabbed both men knowing the last time they met they had a hangover for a week and left the room. Genma sighed and thought what now? By the time the meeting was over it was 10 o'clock at night. Shizune had left to find Naruto and her grandkids with a whole life of questions popping in her head. She was just about to the private section of the ship where she was told Naruto and the kids were when a roar was heard so loud it could be heard for miles. It drew the attention of everyone on board the ship and suddenly all the lights on the ship came on that had been turned off for sleeping passengers. Spotlights came on and started to search out to see as everyone came out to find the disturbance. For the older generation that sound was one that brought back a lot of painful memories. A shadow was seen approaching the ship when another roar was heard and Tsunade and Jiraiya appeared next to Shizune and asked, "What's going on?" Shizune looked out at the shadow just becoming visible in the darkness as the spotlights turned onto it and made the outline of a creature more easily seen. After a few moments everyone was drawn toward that side of the ship and a giant fox with 8 tails could be seen in blue and a figure could be seen standing on top of it, and the closer it got the figure could be seen as Naruto. Itachi landed with Sasuke and asked, "What are you doing here, Naruto?" getting everyone's attention. The figure jumped off the head of the fox and glided down with flowing grace and a white kimono and gracefully touched down on the deck of the ship as everyone looked at the figure who looked like Naruto, but after further observation it was Naruto's sexy no jutsu body. The female Naruto said, "Itachi, get that idiot of a brother of mine and get his out here." Yukie said it's time and he better not be late this time. Itachi nodded and left in a swirl of leaves and Sasuke said, "Who has the others, Naruto?" The female Naruto turned to Sasuke and said, "They are with Karen at the Uchiha compound." Naruto appeared beside Sasuke and said, "You took her glasses, didn't you, Naruto, and what the hell are you doing here? I told you not to leave Yukie's side until I got back." Naruto said, "Listen, idiot. Of course I took her glasses." Yukie said, "It's time and for me to get you there now. Why else do you think I would summon Mirana to bring me here in the middle of the night?" Naruto paled and said, "But they are not supposed to be here for another week." Naruto said, "It's not my fault. Now get your going. I will watch over Yuna and Arashi." And the fox disappeared off the water in a puff of smoke. Naruto looked around frantic and said, "Naruto, Tsunade knows and also Shizune and Erozanin are related, so find out from them." As he jumped into the air and seemed to float as wind gathered around him as he floated in the air out over the sea, and then he started to do hand signs and suddenly screamed, "Kuchio's no jutsu, summoning technique, Kyuubi no Kitsune." And suddenly a cloud of red smoke appeared and there underneath Naruto is the nightmare of 16 years ago. The Kyuubi in all his glory. Naruto said, "Kyuubi, get me to Yukie fast." Kyuubi said, "Fine kid, but remember not to call me Aegean until the battles." And he took off running toward the way Naruto appeared. Everyone was wide-eyed and Sakura came running up and looked around and asked, "What was that and why is Naruto in his sexy no jutsu form?" Everyone turned to look at her and Naruto said, "You suck, Sakura-san." A. That was the Kyuubi, and B. I am not Naruto. Tsunade finally got over her shock and asked, "If you're not Naruto, then who are you?" Naruto turned to her and said, "Well, Bakken. I am his twin sister Naruto." Everyone was standing mouthed agape and Kiba said, "Twin." And Sakura said, finishing his sentence, "Sister." Ibiki came through the crowd and said, "It's good to see you, Aegean Naruto. Since you recovered and left I have not had a chance to see you." Naruto turned and in a kind soft voice said, "It's good to see you also, Ibiki-san. How have you been?" Ibiki said, "Good, and you?" Naruto said, "I have been great, taking care of all my nieces and nephews." Speaking of, where are the other two at? Ino said, "Other two? I thought Naruto only had 2 kids, and how is it that he has a twin sister that we never seen before?" Naruto flinched at that part and looked at Ibiki-san and he said, "Naruto has not told anyone about you yet. It's a touchy subject because of it." She nodded and said, "Well, my idiot brother has little Arashi, who is the oldest, and his twin Yuna. He also has Tsunade, Jiraiya, Orochimaru, Kakashi, Rin, Obito, Sakura, Sasuke and little Naruto Jr., who are also born at the same time." Kiba screamed, "What the? That's 9 kids born at the same time. How the hell did that happen and why did he name those kids that?" Several people started to laugh, among them were Rin, Itachi, Sasuke, and Naruto, who said, "The answer is really simple. He did it out of respect because even though those names are from people who either were alive or are alive, they also have one thing in common. Can anyone guess what it is?" Everyone turned and Jiraiya said, "They all are the last 3 Team 7s, but what I don't understand is where did they come from? When he was here last time he only had the 2. Naruto smiled and said, "The little shit of a brother got her pregnant Aegean before he left, and because of Kyuubi's influence she could have them safely." Shizune asked, "What do you mean, Naruto, and are you really his twin sister?" Naruto said, Well, a secret my brother has is anyone who gets bodily fluids like blood or gets his special abilities to heal from any wound, and also they restore the body after damage. So after she gave birth within a week she had not only her body back like it was when her and Naruto first met, but also it repairs any minor wounds. She lost all the fat from the pregnancy. I am glad I got the also so when I have kids. And to answer your question Shizune Nichan, I am his twin sister. Now what did he mean we were related, and how is Erozanin related to me? Shizune looked around and said, I am Naruto mother, so that means I guess I am also your mother. Jiraiya-sama is your grandfather. Naruto seemed into the sky. No. Kakashi stepped forward and asked, who is arriving that Naruto was not expecting. Naruto said, oh, that would be the new kids. He missed the last two labors so he wanted to be sure to be here for this one. Tsunade felt weak in the knees and asked, exactly how many kids is he expecting this time? Naruto said, just 2 this times. Sakura said, that's impossible to have that many multiple births like that. Naruto smiled and said, spring country's not the only thing fertile here. Personally I think the fox had something to do with it, but who knows? It might be karma paying him back. Shizune asked, what was it that Ibiki mentioned earlier? Naruto flinched and looked down at the deck and said, it is when an assassin thought I was Naruto and tried to kill me, or they did depending on how you look at it. I need to go check on Yuna and Arashi. Ibiki-san, would you mind informing them? Ibiki nodded and they parted for her to walk by. After she was gone everyone turned to Ibiki, who sighed and said, it started. Flashback. A 7-year-old Naruto was in the Saratobi compound where she had lived in secret for the past 7 years. She was told the truth about her brother and they saw each other when they could. Naruto had promised to come see her today, but now it was 8:30 p.m. and he had not made it, so she snuck out and crossed the village to get to Naruto's apartment. She had a key and walked in and reached for the light switch to turn on the light when someone grabbed her arm, and then she felt a massive pain in her chest and saw a kunai sticking out right by her heart. She fell but luckily turned just enough so the kunai did not go further in. The last thing she saw was Naruto walking in the room before she blacked out. End flashback. Naruto, when he saw his sister on the ground after returning from an ABNU mission, knocked both guys out quickly. He then started to help her as best as he could, but she would die soon. They missed her heart but were close enough that it did not matter. Sakura asked, then how did she live? Ibiki said, the Kyuubi told Naruto of a way to save her by giving his blood to her directly at the wound and pumping some of his chakra into her. It healed the wound enough to keep her alive, but the mental damage was too much for her. She was trapped in her mind, in shock in her body. It took her body 6 years to recover completely because of the difficulty of healing a major organ like the heart along with the poison of the weapon. Naruto used a forbidden kinjutsu and put her mind inside the seal while her body was recovering. Ino asked, why did he do that? Ibiki said, so she could still experience the world instead of the darkness of the coma her body was in. He blamed himself for not keeping his promise about being on time, so he vowed to never break a promise again. Whenever you saw Naruto use his sexy jutsu, it was when he was giving control of his body to Naruto. It was a way to allow her some freedom to live. The kinjutsu kept her mind anchored to her body, so her mental image changed with her body, so it aged as well. If you notice, about that time is when he quit using the jutsu. After she was back in her body, she used a henge to walk around town until he got married and sent her here for protection. Tsunade asked, what happened to the 2 men Ibiki? Ibiki paled and asked, do you really want to know? Tsunade said, yes. Ibiki looked around and said, Naruto does not know what he did and he asked me never to tell, but it's the only time I questioned his sanity. He made both men swallow a seed. Shizune asked, that's it? Ibiki shook his head and said, you don't understand. He made them suffer for a week straight with what he did. He used his bloodline to control the seed's growth and had it go into every part of their bodies, but not enough to kill them. He then had them break the skin at each joint of their bodies. It was deranged watching plants come out of a human body, causing a finger to fall off before the next, then the hands and the arms. It was a slow and painful process. If they passed out, he stopped, and with the plants coming out like they did, they could not bleed to death. After he finally killed them, he sent both bodies back to their countries. One to Cloud and one to Iwa, with a note saying, You missed Naruto and I went easy on them. If you send any more I will kill your entire army. Signed the White Ghost. Kakashi fell backwards as he heard the name getting everyone's attention. Jiraiya asked, "What is it, Kakashi?" Kakashi said, "The White Ghost was Naruto. I thought he was just a myth the ABNU created to scare people." Hiash asked, "What do you mean, Kakashi?" Itachi said, "The White Ghost was Naruto codename. While in the village he had a standard black ABNU uniform, but once he left the village he turned it inside out so it was pure white. With his true skills he could kill you and be 100 yards away before the blood would spray out of your body. On the 220 missions we did together he never had a single drop of blood touch his cloak." Ibiki said, "The 610 missions he did after that was also the same. Never a drop of blood on him, but his enemies would be covered in blood and cuts. His true speed and skills is amazing and terrifying at the same time." Tsunade said, "That's it. How the hell did he trick nearly the entire village full of ninja without them knowing it? If what you say is true then he is practically a god of war or something." Ibiki sighed and said, "I have all info on him that I have if you want to go over it, but I think a more private location is in order." Tsunade nodded and said, "I want all of you to come also. I want us all to figure out how the hell he did it." Everyone followed behind her into a conference room and Shizune said, "Let's start with his early life and work from there." Itachi said, "I would probably be the closest to that then. I met Naruto when he was 5. He had already been training under the Sandyame and I was skeptical at first, but after he beat me in a fight I learned he was more than what he seemed." Kakashi said, "But you were already an ABNU captain at that point." Itachi nodded and said, "You don't think I realized that? He did not just beat me though. He flat out humiliated me. Speed, weapon precisions, jutsu, hand sign speed, tiahutsu, and genjutsu he outclassed me in. I attacked with everything I had and he stated one form of combat and beat me for 20 minutes each form. I laid one hit on him in tiahutsu and after that he broke both my arms and 4 ribs." Everyone was stunned at the revelation, most having seen Itachi's skill up front. Itachi said, "After that the Sandaime put him in my squad under me. The one thing I learned from Naruto and the Sandaime was that if you want to hide something put it out front. My squad was one of the most famous until the massacre, yet can anyone tell me the name of the other 3 members of it? No. The reason is because everyone was looking at me because of the fame of a child being in ABNU. No one suspected him being there. We did a total of 220 successful mission. 45 B rank, 75 A rank and 100 S rank missions without a fatality or a single person being hurt." Ibiki stepped forward and said, "It was after the incident with Naruto that I first met Naruto without his mask. Up to then I had no idea. Every day I would see him or his clone in the streets screaming and being annoying, but like Itachi said, the best way to hide something was out in the open. If Naruto walks into a room before today, what would most of your initial reactions have been? Ignore the annoying pest, right? That was his mask he hid behind. Nothing he does is a waste. Every action he did is planned out, every move flawlessly executed. Take his match with Kiba during the prelims. Kiba said, 'Don't remind me, he farted in my face.' Ibiki chuckled and said, 'Actually, no he did not. That was a knockout drug he made for kidnapping missions, but he could not pull it out during battle in the village or it would have raised questions. He used a subtle genjutsu to make everyone think he farted while he released the drug into the air. In 10 minutes no matter what you would have been asleep. He could have beaten you at any time, but he limited his skills to Kujbunshians only, and even then he went easy on you. Think of how many he uses daily and ask how only 5 at most would be a difference.' Neji said, 'Then what about my match? I had closed his chakra points and beat him until he drew on Kyuubi's chakra.' Ibiki burst out laughing and said, 'That's funny. He used Kyuubi's chakra as a discus to cover his increase in speed. If he took off his gravity seals you would have been toast the moment the match began.' Guy asked, 'How much weight does he have on now?' Sasuke said, 'Now or in that match with Neji?' Lee shouted, 'Both.' Sasuke said, 'In the match with Neji he had 65 times normal gravity, now he has 100 times. Gia thought for a moment and said, 'Impossible, his body should have been crushed.' Neji asked, 'What do you mean, Guy? How much did he have when he fought me?' Tsunade said, Naruto body weight has been constant of 150 pounds since he was 10 according to medical records, so that means he had 9,750 pounds of weights on. Now he has 15,000. Hiyashi asked. How good is he then? Inoichi said. I think we will find out at the battles. Sakura thought for a moment and asked, who is the real Naruto? Naruto walked in and said, that's the question, Sakura. Truth be told, he is just a tired warrior who wants to put away his swords. Choji asked, what do you mean? Tenten said, it's an old saying, it means that he wishes to leave the battlefield and live a normal life. If what everyone is saying is true, then that makes sense because he never got to live one before. He was forced to endure beatings as a child. Trained to kill before most are taught to read, lived a double life that was neither his real self, and also a village can hate him. I can't understand why he would do it. Everyone seemed to consider that, and Naruto said, it's all he had. As she left everyone to their thoughts. The next day when the ship pulled into the docks, it was 7 a.m. and everyone was awake at that time and started down the ramp and were surprised by the prosperity of the harbor town they docked at. It looked like it was half the size of Konoha and everything looked well taken care of. Tsunade looked around and Itachi said, if everyone would follow me to the train station. We can be at the castle within the hour. And lead the group through the village and soon to the train station. Nobody said anything, not knowing what to say. Naruto had taken both kids on up ahead the moment they got to shore. Shizune had left to talk to her but did not get a chance to because when she found her after the meeting she was asleep with the kids. Sakura asked, hey Sasuke, why did you not return to the village after the fights? Sasuke said, I had my family Aegean, so I took my fiancé with me here to live. If I would have returned to Konoha, I would have been nothing more than breeding stock. I did not want that, so I chose this instead. Sakura looked down and said, so I see you moved on. Sasuke said, move on, Sakura, we were teammates and somewhat of friends, but we were never more than that, no matter what you thought you wanted. You never really tried to know the real me. You saw my name, money, and fan club, so you blew a friendship away to try and impress me. I was not looking for someone who would change to be with me. I wanted someone who would be themselves. As he walked ahead of her and she sighed. Itachi shook his head and walked up beside Sakura and said, you know that you really should try and look at it from his point of view. Sakura looked at Itachi and asked, what point of view was that? Itachi smirked and said, simple. What would you do if nobody wanted you for you? Instead they wanted you for what they could get. As he walked away from her. Sakura stopped and said, I was not like that. Ino laughed and said, yes you were. We both were. As she sat down next to Sakura. Hiyashi looked at Hinata and asked, so tell me. How much of this have you been hiding? I see you have not stuttered once since the truth came out and you seem calm. Hinata smiled and said, if you wondering if I am stronger than you think I am, then you're right. That was all an act so I could get out of the compound so I can spy for Naruto-sama. Hiyashi said, I see. As he looked away. Hanabi asked, then who is actually stronger, you or father? Itachi, who heard this, said, Hinata. No offense Hiyashi, but Hinata is probably the only one beside Jiraiya or myself that can last against Naruto for any amount of time if he were to get serious, and that is only from experience mostly as well as skills. Hiyashi nods and Hanabi looked at her sister with some new respect. As the train moved, everyone could see how beautiful the country was, and Gaara tensed and looked around the cab and asked, did anyone else just feel that? Everyone looked at him questionably and Tsunade asked, what? Gaara said, I'm not sure. It felt like Naruto when he was drawing on Kyuubi chakra for a moment, but then it was gone. Tsunade frowned and everyone glanced at each other. Finally they arrived at the castle, which the train went to within a quarter of a mile of, and as they approached they saw several people running around. Jiraiya jumped ahead of the group and grabbed a guard and asked, what's wrong? The guard said, Lord Jiraiya, sorry for worrying your group. We were not expecting you for another hour. Naruto-sama asked us to do battle drills in case someone decided to make a run for the castle during the battle, sir. If your group would wait for about 15 minutes we would be glad to escort you in, but please refrain from getting involved in the drill. Oh crap, here comes the third wave. Jiraiya turned and saw a combination of Iwa and Kumo nins with a red sash on their arms all running toward the bridge that connected with the castle. Jiraiya screamed. Everyone out of the way and let them pass, it's battle drills. As he jumped to the side as several Iwa nins jumped over the group from Konoha. All the Konoha people moved to the side and watched as men came out of the woods throwing grappling hooks as well as doing jutsu to make earth bridges to allow them to cross. As the battle heated up, they saw several of the defending troops get hit by pressure points and a lot of the attacking groups went up in smoke, and everyone was looking at the attack patterns and plans and surprised by how thought out they were. Finally an alarm went off and all the Kumo and Iwa nins went up in smoke and a swirl of leaves appeared on the bridge and Naruto appeared and said, "Captains, front and center." 10 men came running up and said, "Yes sir." Naruto walked in front of them and said, "All right, I am proud of the initial defenders successfully stalling the first wave while alerting the castle to the attack as well as beginning preparation to move the VIPs. Captions 1 through 3 good job." 3 men said, "Thank you sir." Naruto turned and said, "Now on to the second wave." For the most part one was pleased with it. I was however saddened when I saw the east wing was breached and 1/3 of the troops in that area were taken out of the battle either with injuries/dead. This is not acceptable. Caption 5. I want you and Caption 6 on dividing your long-range fighters and close-range fighters with more going to the east wing. I know that the west wing was protected perfectly Caption 6, but you also have to understand only Junins would be able to get across at that area of the ravine using several earth jutsu, which gives your long-range attackers more time to take them out. The east wing with a simple earth jutsu could be breached by any genin who has had chakra leaping training. We need to make that side more defensible. Caption 4. You squad's ability to get information from squad 1 through 3, replacing their injured men, getting the wounded to a defendable spot to receive medical attention as well as protecting the medics while having squads 1 through 3 fortify the front entrance was excellent. However, you also had one problem. The medics' supplies were in the wrong area and your men that were having to run and get them was costing time, which results in the loss of lives. Overall, I want you to tell your men that they have improved greatly from the last time I was here and I am proud to have them protecting my family. Naruto stopped and looked at the last 3 captions and said, "All right, Caption 7, please tell me exactly what your squad's primary objective is." The caption said, "To secure the emergency exit for our troops and the royal family." Naruto nods and said, "And where were half of your troops during this battle?" The caption said, "At their jobs, sir." Naruto nods and asked, "And where were you?" The caption looked confused and said, "What do you mean, sir?" Naruto looked at him with a glare and said, "What I mean is, when your men were doing their duty, where were you?" As he unleashed some ki. The caption was sweating and gasping for breath and the caption of Squad 8 said, "Sir, it was my." Naruto hit him with a silencing jutsu and said, "Silence, Captain. I know you're wanting to protect your brother for taking the blame for his mistake, but don't. He needs to hear this himself and his men have a right to know what their leader was doing during this drill." The caption of Squad 7 said, "I was." Naruto sighed and said, "You were with your wife in the broom closet having while you should have been at your post ensuring the escape route with your men. I know you are an honorable man, but think about this. If you did that during a real battle and your men had been killed and you decided to protect your wife by having her escape where everyone believes is the escape route but they were all dead, what would happen to your wife most likely?" The man looked down and said, "I am sorry, sir. I thought that since this was all a drill it would be all right." Naruto sighed and said, "Yes, I understand that, but you put your men, the men of the other squads and your own family at risk by doing that. Your actions, if this was real, could have been the death of everyone here. We each have our own part to do and each has to support each other. If we don't, then all is lost. Now I could give you a punishment for this, but instead I am going to do this. Squad 7. You have heard what your captain has done. If you see no wrong by his action, then he is free of any punishments. If you feel his is wrong and should be punished, you all decide his punishment. Until you are willing to follow his orders, Aegean, and have him as your captain, I want the vice captain to step in for him as leader of your squad, and your captain shall become the vice captain until he has earned your trust." The captain of Squad 7 bowed his head and stepped back to where his men were, and another man stepped forward. Naruto looked at him and said, "Now Squad 7, you all did perfect. Even when the enemy discovered the escape route, you were not only able to protect it but also eliminate the threat as well as notify squad of your progress. Good job. Squad 8. You were able to secure the queen and her family as well as all the important documents as well as providing backup for Squad 7 when they needed it. I am proud of your squad. Squad 9. Your squad performed your duties perfectly by securing all the civilians and escorting them into secure areas as well as setting traps for any enemies. For this I thank you. Now you all have heard what you did good and not on. I want each caption to talk with their squads and try to find ways to improve even more. Agi and I thank you for everything along with my family. Dismissed. Everyone saluted Naruto and walked back to the castle and Naruto turned to see everyone from Konoha gaping and Naruto said, "Sorry about that. The ship made better time than I thought it would so you arrived early. Please follow me inside." Tsunade said. Wait Naruto, what exactly was that? Naruto sighed and said, during the fall of the castle during the reign of Yukie's father the castle fell in exactly 22 minutes. In that time only 5 people escaped. Hatake Kakashi, my wife, 2 guards and the advisor who became Yukie's personal bodyguard over the years before he died when we freed the country. Only reason those 5 even made it was because of Kakashi and his summons. After she took over she wanted to make sure more of her people could escape should the castle ever fell Aegean so I helped her create the 9 squads to protect the castle. Each squad had a duty it has to complete. Every time I came here I would use Kajbunshin to test them and the defense time went from 11 minutes when we first started to 3 hours. In 3 hours time a messenger hawks that are launched by all 3 of the first squads can reach the actual hidden village here that is an hour away and have them send aid. That means that before the castle fell the enemy would have a counter-attack hitting them and would force the enemy to either retreat or deal with the larger threat which would allow the evacuation of the castle of all civilians and wounded. Tsunade nods and Shikamaru said, that's actually a pretty good plan as long as no one delays the ninja from the village somehow. Naruto waved his hand and said, not possible. As he suddenly jumped high into the air and everyone looked at him and gasped as they saw him walking in the sky and Naruto took out a kunai and dropped it and everyone gasped when they heard the sound of the kunai hitting something solid and Naruto grabbed it and jumped down and said, there are 10 of those clear ice bridges from here to the village all taller than Kyuubi. The nins from the village can run across it and attack them from above and don't have to worry about crossing the actual ground that would slow enemies down and since the ice is clear, unless you actually know where they are and have the seal on you to allow you to touch it you could try to land on it all day and if you did it would kill you without the protection seal. Neat little trick Itachi Zabuza picked up in the mist and using the basic of Haku bloodline on a seal back in the village makes it a perfect aid for quick travel. Now let's go inside. I want to see if my children are awake yet. As he started to lead the way. Shizune said. Yes, I can't wait to meet all 13 of my grandchildren. Naruto stopped and looked back and asked, 13, what are you talking about? Sasuke snickered as did Itachi and Naruto glared at both who shut up quickly and Tsunade said, your sister told us you had the 2 who were on the ship, 9 more and the 2 who were being born last night. Naruto slapped his head and said, damn you guys. Listen everyone, you had a joke pulled on you by my little sister. I only have 6 children. 3 boys and 3 girls. She told you I had 9 of them right, did she happen to say the names were those of all of Team 7 members? Sakura said. Yes, why? Naruto shook his head and said, Kyuubi has some of the summons training Arctic foxes here to be nin animals and the 9 foxes that are joked to be my children because of how much time they spend around me when I am here are all named after Team 7. Remind me to kick my sisters later. As he started walking into the castle. When they made it inside Naruto lead them to the throne room and as they entered they saw the 2 children from the boat plus another boy and girl that was sitting by a red-headed woman that Sasuke immediately went over to and as they looked ahead they saw Yukie sitting on a throne with 2 newborns wrapped in her arms asleep. Naruto walked over and took one and sat down beside her and motioned for everyone to come closer. As they did Naruto said, allow me to introduce you all to my real children. You already know Yuna and Arashi who are over there playing with their pet foxes. Over there with Sasuke and Karen are Minato and Haku. The little girl there in Yukie's arms is Ayame and this little guy right here is Inari. Shizune stepped forward and said, hello, I am Shizune and I guess you could say I am your mother-in-law. Yukie looked at her and said, it's a pleasure to meet you Shizune, would you like to hold your granddaughter? Shizune said, if it's all right with you I would since I never got to hold either of my children growing up. As she looked saddened. Yukie handed them and Naruto looked up and saw Tsunade looking at the babies and Naruto said, "Hey grandma, you want to hold your great-grandson?" Tsunade went wide-eyed and said, "No, I mean I don't want to intrude." Naruto waved his hand and said, "Nonsense, come hold him and take care of him." Tsunade walked forward and Naruto carefully handed the baby to her and Tsunade looked at him and smiled a small smile and the baby yawned and Tsunade's heart melted for all about 2 seconds when she realized the warm feeling she felt on her chest was not her heart but rather piss. She glared at the baby and said, "You're going to be trouble, just like your father, aren't you?" The baby gave a cute little smile and Tsunade thought, "Heaven help us all." After that Naruto showed everyone where they would be staying and allowed them to settle in and learn when the meals would be and allowed them to travel around the castle. Naruto then put all the children to nap and Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Shizune all watched them as Naruto and Yukie went to lay down to rest. Naruto showed up a little later and after getting an earful from her mother and grandparents for the mean trick as well as hearing about it from Sakura when she ran into her she finally got to get to know her family. The peace would only last for a short time though as the time for the tournament started to draw near. It has been 3 days since the Konoha group has arrived in Spring Country. To say they were shocked by what they seen would be an understatement. For the first time they all saw Naruto as who he really was, a powerful leader who cared for his people. Each of them felt shame at failing to see the truth and fair treatments of his young life. Today the group was on their way to the elemental village. As they walked Ino said, "Naruto, I have to know something, how strong are you really?" Naruto looked back at her as he held the hand of Yuna and held little Haku in his arms and said, "Ino, I am strong enough to protect what is precious to me. That's all you need to know. If you want to know how many jutsu I know I would say around 2000, if you want to know how much chakra I have enough chakra to fight all 3 Sanins and my father in their prime at the same time. If you want to know how smart I am, I could beat Shikamaru in shogi at least half the time. Not bad for a dead last huh." As he turned and looked at the little girl who was smiling up at him walking beside him. Itachi appeared in a swirl of leaves in front of Naruto and said, "Naruto-sama, the team from Iwa has arrived on the island." Naruto frowned and said, "I see, where are they?" Itachi said, "I have had the ambassador of their country who arrived earlier to get the details of where and when to stay and fight. He is currently leading them to their preparation area near the exam field." Naruto nods and said, "Okay, are the detection seals activated yet?" Itachi said, "Yes Naruto-sama." Naruto said, "Good, if the seals go off I want the all militia to increase security to their villages and have the black ops to intercept them and order them back to their area to wait or forfeit their battle. If they attack spring the security seals and then deliver their bodies to the Earth Lord as well as the other lords showing how they tried to sabotage the battle. Tell the others to inform everyone the same thing and notify the Hyugas when Cloud arrive but when Danzo arrives to notify me personally." Itachi said, "Yes sir." As he left as a swirl of leaves. Tsunade asked, "What was that all about?" Naruto said, "Simple, the area where everyone is staying for the battle is set up with seals buried underground. If they are activated a prison shield similar to the one Orochimaru used Agent the Sandame will come up in that area and slowly close in until everyone inside is dead." Everyone gasped and Shizune asked, "Is our area the same?" Naruto said, "Yes. I had no choice in the matter of that because it's the only way I could get the feudal lords to agree to the precautions I wanted was if everyone was treated equal. Now let's continue our trip. We should reach the village in about 15 minutes." As they continued to walk. As they approached the village they noticed that it was protected by 5 walls which shocked everyone. A wall of ice was the outer wall, 20 feet away was a wall of earth, 20 feet away from that still heading toward the actual village was a wall of wood, 20 feet after that was a wall of metal and finally after that was another wall that was a combination of all the other walls put together. Naruto saw everyone's expressions and said, "Oh the joys of seals. The funny thing about all those walls is the seals on them are all solar powered and recharge every day and the walls are self-repairing." Jiraiya said, "Who came up with these seal Naruto? I know they were above your skills." Naruto said, "Actually, it was about 10 of us who actually came up with these. I was one of them, Zabuza was one, The Sandaime had part of this he had planned for Konoha walls as well, but the council refused to let him when he approached them after getting the general seal for it from my father notes. I must say, counting them, that made 4 of us. Itachi has some knowledge with skill, making 5. The other 5 were people who came here and I refused to speak about for their privacy. Jiraiya nods and said, well, I am impressed by what I see. 5 walls protecting the village. Each wall has to be breached differently, and the last wall would be nearly impossible for a small group to breach, meaning if you picked the enemy off before they got there or weakened them, then your last wall would stop them. Naruto said. Correct. Well, everyone, welcome to the elemental village. Everyone here knows everyone else, so they will know you're not of the village when they see you. You can walk around and enjoy yourselves, but if someone asks you to stay away from something or not to go near something, please heed their warning, because odds are there are traps there to kill anyone who is not supposed to be here. Thank you. As he took his 2 children and started to walk toward a set of houses to the east. Tsunade asked, where are you going, Naruto? Naruto said, see those houses up ahead? It's actually an indoor park where all the children go to play with each other. I was just taking Yuna here to see her friends and relax with my other child. You don't need a tour guide here since the whole village would be willing to help you and watch you. As he turned and continued to walk away. After he was gone, Tsunade said, you heard him, but I want everyone to meet back at that indoor park in 4 hours so we can discuss what we see. As she saw a hot spring and headed for it. Surprisingly, Jiraiya did not go to the hot spring, instead he went to look at the walls again. As everyone split up, Kakashi, who had remained pretty much quiet since hearing what title Naruto had when he was in Anbu, decided to go talk to Naruto. When he found Naruto, he was sitting on a blanket under a tree with his little baby asleep, and he saw his daughter playing with some other children. Kakashi walked up to Naruto and asked, can I sit down? Naruto shrugged and said, as long as you don't wake the little one, I don't mind. Kakashi nods and asked, are you really the white ghost? Naruto said, and if I am? Kakashi said, look, Naruto, I won. Naruto held his hand up and said, do you know why I was put on your team in the first place, Kakashi? Kakashi said, no. Naruto said, because for a man who quotes look underneath you fail more times than most when it comes to personal relations. Did you know we did an Anbu mission together and you never knew it? Kakashi blinked and asked, really, when? Naruto said, remember about 8 years back when Iwa put an outpost on the border of Fire Country and Iwa hiding it as a village? Kakashi said, Ventika, right? Naruto nods and said, yes, remember the 2 extra men who were assigned to your team who supposedly died on that mission? Kakashi nods and Naruto said, we didn't die. Abra Uchiha and I were the 2 who were assigned. We used your mission as a cover to get into the village, and while your squad went and attacked the village drawing attention to you, I assassinated the ambassador from Kumo who was there at the time to discuss a war pact. I then had Abra go and infiltrate Kumo disguised as the ambassador, and he was the one who stole Kumo forbidden scroll. Kakashi said, so why fake your deaths? Naruto said, no paper trail. Dead men tell no tale. When you returned and told the Sandaime we were presumed dead, he marked us off as Black Ops, and so nobody knew of us. As you know, Black Ops don't get put on the memorial stone for 3 years, and by that time you had forgotten about it. The perfect way to get by under the watchful eyes of the village. Kakashi frowned and said, so my team was expendable on that mission? Naruto said, no, your job was to attack the village and make it look like Kumo was responsible, with your Chidori attack making it look like it was them. That stopped them from agreeing to another meeting for at least 2 years. Kakashi sighed and said, I am not used to seeing this side of you, Naruto. Naruto waved his hand and said, don't worry about it. After all, when this battle is over, you won't be seeing me any longer since I am staying here with my family. Kakashi said, you know the council won't like that. Naruto said, you know the council can kiss my blonde, right? As he looked at Kakashi with a deadpan look. Kakashi really tried to keep it in, but he had to laugh at that one. Only Naruto had the balls to say that. Just then the baby woke up crying to the sound of Kakashi laughing, and Naruto glared at Kakashi and said, I told you not to wake the baby up, as his fist hit Kakashi, sending him flying across the field and into a tree, passed out. Naruto picked up the baby and said, there, little one, the big bad pervert's gone now. As he rocked the baby. When Tsunade and the others arrived, they saw Kakashi twitching bound to a tree by vines and had makeup all over his face as well as bows in his hair. For most, the thought of finally seeing Kakashi face would have been good, but the condition he was in now was too much to take. Everyone burst out laughing. Yuna, who was laying beside her little brother, sister, and her dad on the blanket, looked up when the baby started to cry again and asked, "Does that mean I can play makeover with them also, Daddy?" As she gave the even more potent little vixen I know jutsu to Naruto. Naruto broke in seconds and said, "Go ahead." Yuna smiled and slammed her hands into the ground, and shouts were heard as vines caught all the Konoha visitors by surprise, and she walked over with a scroll and bit her thumb and ran it across the scroll, and out popped out tons of makeup and bows and said, "Who has the first appointment?" Everyone paled at the evil smile she had on her face. Another week flew by in the elemental village. Naruto had as promised allowed the Konoha group to travel around the village, and they all found things they came to like about the village. Naruto had been spending time with his wife and children as well as talking over with a few other people about things that concerned the upcoming battle. Dustin had completed the legendary Raijin as well as Kakashi Chakra Fang. Tsunade had gave the Raijin to Naruto, and Kakashi kept his father's sword. Sakura father's sword had been completed as well, and now she had it and was often seen sparring with either Zabuza, Itachi, or Kakashi. Speaking of Itachi, Sakura and him have been spending a lot of time together lately. Sakura finally talked to Sasuke and his fiancée Karen, and Sakura gave them her blessings after doing a lot of soul searching. When she gave them her blessing and she left, Itachi came to her for comfort and have been pretty much inseparable. Flashback. Sakura said, "And I want you to know, Sasuke, that I am sorry for taking so long to grow up, and I am glad to see that you have found someone who makes you happy. I hope we can still be friends after all of this." Sasuke said, "I would like that, Sakura." Sakura smiled and left the house where Sasuke lived, and as she was walking away, a voice said, "It seemed to be a good time for closure, huh?" Sakura looked up and saw Itachi and said, "Yes." Itachi said, "So what do you plan to do now?" as he walked beside her. Sakura said, "I don't know. I chased after Sasuke so long I feel lost." Itachi said, "Perhaps you just need a guide until you find your way," as he looked up at the sky. Sakura looked at him and asked, "That's corny. How could someone guide me when even I don't know my?" Sakura was silenced by a kiss on the lips from Itachi, and as he pulled away he said, "Perhaps you're going my way." Sakura looked at him frozen in place, and Itachi saw she was shocked and put his arm around hers and said, "Let's go eat. I'm hungry," as he started dragging her away. End flashback. Kakashi and Rin have both been spending time together, and Rin explained how she ran into Naruto while he was on his training trip with Jiraiya. Tsunade and Jiraiya had been spending time with their great-grandchildren, and Shizune has been spending time with them as well and with her daughter and son. Hiyashi, Neji, Hinata, and Hanabi all had a sparring match, and to the shock of the other three, Hinata handed them all their asses. Flashback. Hiyashi, Neji and Hanabi all three were on the ground panting, with Hinata standing in the middle of the three and said, "Still think I am weak, Neji?" Neji gulped and shook his head no, and Hiyashi asked, "What was that attack?" Hinata said, "Oh, just something I came up with while dancing on the water," with a smirk on her face. End flashback. Both generations of the Ino, Shika, Sho groups have been talking and training. As for the others, they mostly looked around and enjoyed their time in the village. Now we find everyone on the eve of battle. Naruto sighed as he stood in front of the group now, and he said, "All right everyone, I have put this off long enough. I have received word that Danzo and his men are here on the island now. He has 25 men as well as another 25 as his own personal escort. Rain and Kumo have both arrived as well, so it looks like it's only going to be only the 4 teams instead of the others. Apparently the other superpower has decided not to get involved. I asked you all before to think about it, and now I need an answer because the battle begins tomorrow. Who among you will be willing to fight on my side? I have Itachi, Sasuke, Zabuza, Haku, and myself. I can have up to 20 more." Tsunade stepped forward and said, "I'm in." Jiraiya said, "So am I." Sakura said, "It's not going to be much of a team 7 if I don't fight also." Naruto said, "I am fighting." Naruto said, "No, you're not, Naruto. You may be able to fight, but I need you to protect Yukie and the kids for me. I don't trust Danzo." Kakashi said, Team 7 united again, so I am in. Naruto said, well, that's 9. Gaara said, my sibling and I are in. Naruto said, thank you, Gaara, that brings us up to 12. Hinata said, I am with you, Hokage-sama. Hiashi said, Hinata, I would like to join myself, but I think I will instead stay in the spectators' seats and keep an eye on Danzo for you, Naruto. Naruto said, I thank you for that, Hiashi. Guy said, my flames of youth burn brightly and I will follow your orders. Lee said, Guy-sensei. I will as well. Guy said, Lee. Lee said, Guy-sensei. 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 Guy said, Lee. Naruto slammed both of their heads together and said, finally. As everyone looked at him and Naruto said, so how many does that bring us up to? Quote. Neji said, counting me makes 16. Naruto nods and said, so anyone else? Tenten said, if my teammates are in it, so am I. Naruto nods and Anko said, I am in Gaki. Ibiki said, I would like to, but I am not in as good of shape as I once was sitting behind the desk in the torture cells. I will also help Hiashi keep an eye out for anything suspicious. Naruto said, well, that's 18. Sume said, the 3 mutts are with you, Naruto-sama. Naruto said, so that makes 21 correct. Shikaku said, the original Ino Shikacho team with assist you and our children will aid should Danzo try anything during the battle. Naruto said, very well, anyone else? Shibi said, I will be your last member, Naruto-sama. My son will aid the other heirs along with Ibiki and Hiashi in keeping an eye on Danzo and his men. He can mark them each with a female in case Danzo tries to break the rules. Naruto nods and said, I thank you all and I want you all to know I am grateful for all the help and I hope we all come out of this battle alive. In order to do this though we need a plan because we have 75 other people who will try to kill us, so any ideas? Shikamaru got into his thinking pose, drawing everyone's attention, and he said, well. And so began the planning for the next day of battle. The next day the sun had just rose and we find 99 people all standing on the ground prepared for combat facing a wall where on top of the wall was a spectator's box that was full with several feudal lords, Princess Yukie along with Naruto and 10 guards around her. On the right side of the stands was Danzo along with several men dressed in Chunin and Junin outfits. The Fire Lord stood up and before he could say anything a yellow flash appeared on the ground in front of the 99 people and a man with a solid white cloak and a white Anbu mask with no eye holes appeared in front of everyone. The person bowed and said, forgive my lateness, Lord. It appears that another party wishes to intervene in these matches. The Fire Lord looked at the Anbu and asked, who are you and who is this other party? The Anbu took off his mask and said, I am Naruto Namikaze, codename White Ghost and retiring Rokudime Hokage of Konoha, sir. As for the other party that has requested to enter the battle, sir, it would appear to be a group consisting of missing nins being led by the who appears to be Orochimaru. At the name of the leader several people flinched and the Fire Lord said, but Orochimaru is dead. Laughter could be heard drawing everyone's attention and Naruto slipped his mask back on and pulled his cloak back over his head as he walked over to the Konoha group. Everyone looked where the laughter was heard and to everyone's shock there stood Orochimaru who said, it's so nice to see you again, Naruto-kun. I have finally taken over my former subordinate Kabuto body and now live again. I heard about this little tournament you had here and decided to bring my own into this battle as well. Of course you have to recognize me as group of potential investors, feudal lords, because should you not then my men would be glad to start a new village in your countries like I did in Rice country. In fact, that's what I plan to do with Konoha after I win this battle. Think of all those test subjects. Kukukukik. Sasuke clenched his fist as Naruto walked beside him and said, I should have killed the bastard when I had the chance. Naruto said, take it easy. The bastard just gave me a chance to scare the shit out of everyone with the Hiraishin and my codename. I got the entire island on high alert right now, so watch yourself. Sasuke nods, and the Fire Lord, after talking with the other leaders, said, very well, Orochimaru. I don't know how you're alive, Aegean, but you are allowed to enter as well. Please take your spot while I explain the rules. Orochimaru walked over with his men, who were all dressed in the cloths of the Sound Village shinobi, and you could not see anything different about any of them. As he stood there, he said, My Tsunade, Jiraiya, I must say that age has not been kindly to either of you. I wonder, are the rumors I heard about you both being the parents of the Yondaime was true, and that your great-grandchildren have the Mukuden abilities? If so, maybe they can be my test subjects as well. At this, several people wanted to kill the snake bastard, and Tsunade, who was being restrained by Jiraiya, said, I will kill you before you ever get near my family, bastard. Orochimaru chuckled and said, we shall see, Tsunade. The Fire Lord said, enough talking, everyone. Now the rules are simple. Each team has 25 people. It is 8 a.m. You have until noon to prepare. At noon, the ceasefire that has been in effect since you arrive will end, and you will fight until your team is killed, your team surrenders or is captured, and you are put in one of the holding cells surrounding the battlefield. If you are captured, you cannot escape until the end of the battle. If you surrender and put yourself in the holding cells, you cannot change your mind and return later. Once inside the holding cells, you also will not be harmed by anyone else either. This battle will continue until either one team is all that is left. As long as one person remains on a team, then the team still continues. You may use anything and everything at your disposal, but you will not be allowed to leave the battlegrounds that is encircled by these walls. There are cameras all over the battlefield, allowing us to see what is going on. That is all. You may go. Just like that, everyone was gone in a blur. Danzo said, My, that was quite a surprise. Hiashi, who was near him with Ibiki, said, yes, it was. Ibiki asked, so how does it feel to know you are responsible for our situation, Danzo? Danzo said, I like it. I am finally going to get everything I wanted. Everything. As he glanced over at Princess Yukie, Ibiki glanced at Hiashi, who activated his bloodline, following as many people as he could before shutting it off when they got too far apart. As Orochimaru headed toward the area his spies informed him about, he thought back to what happened several days before. Flashback. Orochimaru was now standing in front of a group of dead Root members, and he said, so tell me, Danzo, why have you showed up at this time? Danzo stepped out of the shadows and said, I have a proposition for you that I believe we both would find beneficial. Orochimaru asked, and what is that? As he held out the grasscutter's sword. Danzo said, how would you like revenge on the Kyuubi brat, Konoha, and your former teammates? Orochimaru said, interesting, and how would you arrange this? Danzo pulled out a scroll and tossed it to Orochimaru, who caught it, and he opened it and began to read. As he read, his eyes sparkled with anger and said, I see, I will agree then. Danzo said, good. Orochimaru said, oh yeah, I forgot. As he disappeared and reappeared in front of Danzo, stabbing grasscutter into him, and said, you shall be the first to die in my revenge. Of course you will still serve a purpose to me. As he killed off several Root members and wounded others. Orochimaru then began handsize and slammed his hands into the ground as a coffin rose up from the ground and the cover came off of the coffin, and Danzo stepped out. Orochimaru said, yes, you shall serve me well, since I already knew all of this and more. Kukukuku. As he planted a kunai in the back of the head of Danzo. Danzo kneeled and asked, what are your orders, Orochimaru-sama? Orochimaru smirked. End flashback. Orochimaru thought. Soon I shall have everything I want, including the perfect body and my revenge. Kukukuku. Naruto and the rest of his team arrived at the location they decided to act as their staging area, and he looked around and asked, anyone? Itachi, Sasuke, Neji and Hinata activated their bloodlines and said, no, we're clear. Naruto nods and said, who the hell was that back there? Drawing everyone's attention. Sakura asked, what do you mean, Naruto? That was Orochimaru. Naruto said, No, it wasn't. His smell was wrong to be either Orochimaru or Kabuto. It's like he's wearing Orochimaru face like Orochimaru did that rain nin back in the Chunin exams Sakura. Sasuke said. I agree, the chakra level was too low for Orochimaru. Whoever that was not Orochimaru. Tsunade asked. So what are you saying? Naruto said. I am saying that the fact that someone is impersonating Orochimaru means the real one is somewhere close by or that we have someone else pulling the strings. Shibi said. I have placed bugs on their team and there is something off about them. My bugs don't like their chakra. Naruto frowned and Jiraiya said. So what should we do about it? Naruto said. We continue as planned. I want everyone to avoid Orochimaru army for now. We deal with the teams as planned and then reform to work on Orochimaru. Tsunade, you take your team to deal with the Kumo. Jiraiya, you take your team to deal with Iwa. I will take my team to deal with Danzo men. Remember, no one plays hero. I don't want to add anyone else to the memorial stone before I retire. That is an order. Everyone smirked and said, yes sir. Naruto smiled and said, good, so how long we have now? Itachi said, 25 minutes. Naruto nods and pulled out a scroll and unsealed it and a roll of Triprong Kuniyas came out and Naruto said, alright everyone, take one kunai and if you run into something you can't handle throw it. Then just hold on. I will be there to help as soon as possible. Everyone looked at him and took one. Neji stepped forward and said, Naruto, I must ask something. When we fought in the exams and you said you would change the Hyuga clan. What did you mean? Naruto smiled and said, Hinata, would you mind? Hinata said, not at all Naruto. He meant this. As she turned around and raised her hair off her neck. Everyone gasped and Neji asked, what is that? Hinata let her hair go and said, it's a new seal that I want to put on the entire clan. It protects the bloodline without subjecting half of them. It was a compromise I asked Naruto to put into effect should he ever have to reveal his true position. It was the cost for me being his spy. Naruto said, my father originally designed it and I tweaked it later. Only downside is you can't transplant an eye like Kakashi. As he frowned. Neji said, I see. Thank you Naruto-sama. Naruto said, don't Neji. I am just Naruto. I hate formalities, especially to those I consider friends. Neji nods and Naruto sighed and said, alright everyone, divide in your teams, watch your backs and let's kick some. Just then an explosion was heard in the distance and Naruto said, that's the cue. Naruto, Itachi, Hinata, Sasuke, Jiraiya, and Tsunade all began making hand signs and said together, Kyuchino's no jutsu, as the entire area was covered in smoke. When the smoke cleared there stood Kyuubi, Gambunta, Katsuya, Mamba the new snake boss, and Lancelot the falcon boss, and Atlas the raven boss. Each of the bosses looked at each other and Naruto said, alright Shibi, which way are our targets? Shibi said, the Kumo team is to the north. Danzo team is to the west. Iwa are to the south of us and the rain nins are. That's strange. Naruto asked. What? Shibi said. Danzo, Orochimaru, and the rain nins are all now in the west but they seem to be waiting. Naruto frowned and said. Jiraiya and Tsunade, proceed as planned. Kyuubi, head west Itachi Hinata, have you summons take flight and look for easy prey. Itachi said. You heard him Atlas, proceed. Hinata said. Go Lancelot. Jiraiya said. Let's go Gambunta, it's time to rock and roll. Gambunta took out his pipe and blew smoke at Kyuubi and said, I still don't like you, as he jumped away. Following behind Jiraiya and Gambunta was Anko, the Ino, Shika, Cho group along with Neji, Kakashi and Hana. Tsunade said, Katsuya, follow Mamba. Sasuke said, Mamba, I want you to dig a tunnel to the north big enough to allow Katsuya to follow. When you surface anyone with a Kumo headband as lunch. Mamba rattled its tail and dove into the ground and Katsuya followed. Tsunade jumped in the hole followed by Sakura, Hinata, Sasuke, Kiba, Tamari, Kankuro, Gaara and Shibi. Naruto sighed and said, alright everyone, let's follow Kyuubi. Behind Naruto was Tenten, Lee, Guy, Zabuza, Haku, Sum and Itachi. Meanwhile in the spectators' box Danzo looked around and said, tell me Hiashi, why are you really here? I mean, surely you could be of more use on the battlefield instead of up here. Ibiki, I can understand, but you are not here for any reason I can see. Hiashi said. I am here because I do not believe this should be taking place here and now. Danzo said nothing as he looked at the monitors on the ceiling watching the scene and thought, it's almost time. As Jiraiya was holding on to Gambunta, he soon saw the Iwa Nins, but something was wrong. It was not until Gambunta jumped into the air again did Jiraiya realize exactly was wrong. He said, oh shit. Meanwhile, with Tsunade, Mamba had just burst through the ground where it detected the Kumo Nins, and Katsuya came out just moments later. Tsunade saw the Kumo Nins were all gathered together as Mamba charged at them to get his meal when she saw something that scared her. She said, not good. On the other side of the field, Kyuubi howled into the air as he smelled the scent of the group on ninja he was coming toward and thought, yes, finally a chance to feed again. Naruto, who was trailing behind him, saw Kyuubi stop for some reason, and Naruto ran up Kyuubi's leg and jumped on his head and looked and thought, oh god no. In 3 different places around the arena, smoke was suddenly burst from the area. As the smoke cleared where Jiraiya was stood, nearly 1,000 Iwa Nins. With Tsunade there stood close to 400 Kumo Nins all glaring at her. With Naruto, as the smoke cleared, Naruto paled because there standing on the remains of a summoning circle was nearly 400 Sound Nins, around 400 Rain Nins, and 200 Root members and Orochimaru standing there, and he said, you lose, Kyuubi brat, as he reached up to his face and pulled it away, and Naruto went wide-eyed as there stood Danzo. Naruto at that moment felt his twin sister chakra flare and thought, no, my family.